I was travelling on a train. Nothing unusual in that. This was a train from Fitzwilliam to Wakefield Westgate in Yorkshire. It was a very full train. It was a Monday morning rush hour, and I was standing, as were many others. A few yards away from me stood a young woman who was not lurching around with the bending and braking of the train, as I was, but who was quietly rocking backwards and forwards on the balls of her feet. She had long hair, and I didn't immediately notice the earphones that she was wearing, but I did notice her elegance, her poise, a vitality that seemed to emanate from her. She was probably commuting to work, but she was almost dancing to work, energized and, it seemed to me, blessed by an internal rhythm which I couldn't share, but I could appreciate. A favourite film of my boys as they grew up was Disney's Jungle Book. Maybe it still is, Tim. I confess I haven't seen the new version, but every word, every scene, every note from that 1967 film is imprinted on my soul. Do you remember the scene where the irrepressible bear Baloo is supposed to be looking after the orphan Mowgli, but instead he becomes captivated, entranced by the jungle rhythms of the ape King Louie, and he almost allows the evil snake Kaa to kidnap the boy? Or the song Bare Necessities, a song which makes many profound theological observations. A song which I hoped we were going to watch this afternoon, but Disney's copyright laws are just a bit too tight. But you remember it, don't you? And again, Baloo is carried away with his own rhythms, and he can't understand how Bagheera, the haughty panther in the tree, can resist the rhythm. Playfully, he pulls Bagheera's tail. Get with the beat, Baggy. Maybe we have on occasion, in church even, felt sympathy with that. Get with the beat, Baggy. I would not describe myself as a dancer. And my husband, Andrew, who is wonderful in every other respect, and without whom I certainly wouldn't be standing here today, would not describe himself as a dancer either. We did attend ballroom dancing classes at university many years ago together for one term, but even though risk assessments had not yet then been invented, discretion overcame our valour. But just once, however, I have known what it is to be swept away by the rhythm of the dance. It was the summer ball which followed our school speech day in 1978. We didn't know to call it a prom in 1978. And as I stood with friends chatting at the side of the hall, I noticed to my horror the metalwork teacher approaching. I'm not particularly gifted at metalwork either. But I went to a very equal opportunity school. Rather unkindly, I was part of a group who called this particular teacher Greasy Hargreaves. I do hope he's not here today. Because of his black, slicked back hair. There was no escape, and I politely allowed myself to be led onto the dance floor by Greasy Hargreaves, not knowing that he was a champion ballroom dancer. For the next few minutes, I didn't feel my feet touch the floor as I was caught up in the incredible power of the beat, the mystery of the steps, the rhythm of the dance. 39 years ago, but I can still remember it. And television program makers have, of course, understood something of this irresistible, compelling nature of the dance, and they feed the nation's addiction to rhythm weekly with doses of Strictly. Wesley knew that long before Strictly, and we've just sung those words, and my heart it doth dance at the sound of my name. And I have to say, there was quite a bit of dancing going on amongst the past presidents and vice presidents. Life is all about rhythm. The essential rhythm of our heartbeat, the daily rhythm of darkness and light, the seasonal rhythm of summer and winter, growth and dormancy. Rhythm is everywhere. Rhythm is the building block of life. Over the past few years, I've been exploring ways of doing pilgrimage. And whilst pilgrimage doesn't have to involve walking, it very often does. And the rhythm of walking is vital to that. The theologian and wilderness trekker Belden Lane, in his book Backpacking with the Saints, talks about the joy of allowing the body's rhythm, the natural rhythm of walking, to carry us on a journey. Whereas panic, he says, comes from the mind, and we need to guard against allowing panic to disrupt our rhythm, rather learn to trust our body's rhythm. If we extend that thought, perhaps we recognize that some of the world's greatest disasters occur when the rhythm of seed time and harvest is broken down. And maybe in our own lives, some of our personal disasters too could be traced to a breakdown of rhythm. Having said that, I recognize that there can be a shadow side to rhythm as well. For some of us, perhaps for all of us at certain times in our life, too rigid a rhythm can feel stifling, threatening, life-sapping. We can become slaves of habit, bound to rituals or rules, captured by inertia as we see no way out of a predictable cycle which leads to death and decay. Life seems to consist of nothing but the pointless rhythms of work, sleep, and eating. Why get out of bed day by day just to go through the same futile circle day in, day out? The desert fathers and mothers living in the 4th century in those isolated communities around Egypt, those wise men and women who seem to have encountered every difficulty of our modern age and who still have so much to share, knew about this listlessness. They called it acedia, which is sometimes understood as sloth, but it's not laziness. It's rather an inability to be energized, an overwhelming sense of futility. And such acedia is not unlinked to depression. Those desert sages saw it as one of the passions of the spiritual life, something which comes without invitation, but which needs hard work to overcome. And they recognize that it may, in part at least, be brought about by investing too much in the rhythm itself, rather than the life to which the rhythm leads. Like everything else, rhythm needs balance and poise. Back to the woman on the train. So, day by day, the theme which Lorraine and I want to develop during this year focuses on the rhythms of our Christian mission and discipleship, rhythms which can be life-giving and refreshing. The rhythms of prayer and worship, of study and sharing, the rhythm of the church's year as it moves through periods of feasting and fasting, of celebration and preparation, of penitence and of praise. The rhythm of daily Bible reading, advocated here by the Reverend Lena Kim, who I met on my partnership visit to Russia earlier this year. Lena serves in Moscow. She edits the Russian Upper Room daily devotional, which she's holding there. Lorraine will be saying more about this day-by-day theme tomorrow, and we invite you all to get with the beat this year. But for a little while this afternoon, I want to dig deeper into one particular rhythm of our lives, the rhythm of laughter and lament. My parents would have very much liked to be here today, so I've brought them along, and here they are. I'm very proud of the fact that my father was converted through Methodist laughter. When he started studying at Cambridge in the 1940s, week by week on Monday evenings, he heard gales of laughter coming from the student bedroom above his. Eventually, he went upstairs and knocked on the door and asked, "What is it that happens here on a Monday evening, and can I join in?" What happened was the weekly meeting of the METSOC in his college, the Methodist Society, and of course he could join in. And through that group, my father discovered Christ and found a faith to which he held until his death in 2005. I really hope that my dad was not the only person ever to be converted through Methodist laughter, but I don't know of any other such stories. Perhaps you do. Do we ever consider laughter as a mission strategy? I fear we don't. I think, if anything, sometimes we seem to suppress the rich humor in so many of the Bible passages and the stories that Jesus told. We feel guilty if something makes us start giggling in church. Perhaps God doesn't mind that too much. I had a conversation not long ago with a woman who said to me, she has very poor health, but she's always laughing, and she said to me, God has given me the gift of a sense of humour so that I can cope with my life. What a great philosophy. And she's right. Laughter can be the very thing which gets us through hard times. Ask any funeral director. One way of dealing with our worst embarrassments is to laugh about them. I still cringe when I remember a particular tea party during my student years in Durham. One of the Roman Catholic priests in training, who shared in many of the lectures that I attended, invited me for tea. Intrigued by the opportunity of visiting the Catholic Ashore College, I accepted. Small talk was somewhat stilted between us, however, and wasn't helped along when, perhaps thinking of some of the Methodist dynasties I've known, I asked this young Roman Catholic priest in training, "Was your father a priest?" Perhaps our fear of laughing in the wrong place or at the wrong time dates back 4,000 years ago to Sarah. To be quite honest, I don't think marriage to Abraham would have given Sarah very much to laugh about for the first few decades. Traipsing around the deserts of the Middle East in response to the call of an invisible God, twice handed over to other men to protect her husband, and openly scorned by him on more than one occasion. But at last, in Genesis chapter 18, she hears good news, overhears amazing news, wonderful news, the unbelievable news that at the age of 90 and with a husband of 100, she is to bear a son, and she laughs. Well, this may have been out of sheer incredulity. It may have been out of a deeply suppressed hope. It may, of course, have been a reflection on her husband. Whatever, she laughs. And she's challenged for laughing by the angels, and she swiftly denies it. It's almost like a scene from the Jungle Book. But happily, just 3 chapters and 12 months later, she has cause to laugh again, and this time with more joy, for she does indeed give birth to a son. And she declares, God has brought laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh with me. And she names him Laughter, Isaac. And laughter grew up to be the second of the patriarchs. That's how important laughter is in our history. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, father of many, laughter, supplanter. I know which name I like best. Sometimes to laugh about our deepest anxieties and fears is the best coping mechanism. We're all on an aging journey. Even my 2 beautiful little great-nephews who are here, Charlie and Samuel, who are not even 1 year old yet, and I'm so thrilled that they're here. But we're all on that aging journey, and that causes anxiety for some of us. My Auntie Hilda was a wonderful character. She was a generous, impulsive woman who always made my sister and me laugh when we went to stay, not so much by her jokes as by her deliciously chaotic way of life, so different from our own methodical Methodist household. The tales of Auntie Hilda are legion, and I will only tell one now. Never highly skilled with technology, towards the end of her life, Auntie Hilda could be defeated by the television. So my mother would phone her every Sunday afternoon to tell her when Songs of Praise was starting. On one Sunday, she phoned as usual, and a few minutes later, Auntie Hilda phoned back, "You're wrong, Phyllis. Songs of Praise isn't on." "It is, Hilda. I'm watching it." "Just press 1 on the remote control." Another few minutes passed, and Auntie Hilda rang again. "Phyllis, it's not on." "Hilda, it is. Just press 1. In frustration, my aunt cried, "I am pressing 1, and all I get is you." even with my high view of laughter, I must admit I was surprised when I put laughter into a Bible search engine, and it told me there were 152 uses of the word. But it turned out that all but 9 of these were actually uses of the word slaughter, which is... which is not quite the same thing. However, I do rejoice that Job promises that God will fill your mouth with laughter and your lips with shouts of joy. And the psalmist has similar hopes, even if Ecclesiastes, from which most of the other references come, is a little bit more like the Eeyore of the Old Testament in his outlook, seeing laughter as madness and pleasure as useless. But the writer of Proverbs, in that book's one reference to laughter, touches on something important to which we now turn. Proverbs chapter 14 and verse 13 says, "Even in laughter, the heart is sad, and the end of joy is grief." Is this the Old Testament way of saying it'll all end in tears? Or is the writer correct in bringing laughter and grief together like this? We love laughter. We need laughter. We accept laughter as a gift from God. Let's make it our aim to laugh more this year. But we know that life is not all laughter. Our younger son, Peter, loved to laugh. At dramatic comedy, be it Fawlty Towers or The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and at the comedy of errors, which family life so often is. But as many of you know, he was also in touch with the tragedy of being human and of trying to grow up in a confusing world. And he ended his own life at the age of 18 in 2012. I want to use this opportunity to say thank you now. Thank you for the remarkable way in which you, our family and close friends, and you all, our wider Methodist family across the connection and around the world, supported Andrew and Tim and me, held us, prayed for us, walked with us through the valley of the shadow of death, and do so still. So many tears, so many what-ifs. Nicola wrote in my profile for the Methodist Recorder that my grief will always be a significant part of who I am, and she's right. My grief will travel with me around the connection this year. I don't have a choice about that. I can't find a way of leaving it behind. I hope that you will be able to accommodate that as well as me. I may still need the tissues she mentions. But I hope furthermore that we as a church can continue to be a church which is willing to walk alongside those whose hearts are breaking, without needing to hurry them, without making false attempts to cheer them up, without saying, at least, or looking on the bright side, because sometimes there is no bright side. But we have discovered, that darkness is another arena of God's revelation, and darkness has much to teach us. Lament is not only something personal and individual. Throughout the history of God's people, there runs a strong thread of communal lament, which recognizes that God may well be in God's heaven, but all is not right with the world. Last year, at this same point in the Methodist Conference, my predecessor Rachel challenged us so powerfully to recognize and inhabit God's longing for oceans of justice, God's heartbreak for a world of injustice and suffering. And throughout this past year, Roger and Rachel have taken that message of holiness and justice far and wide, and they've helped us to move forwards. But as Roger reflected yesterday, there is still so much in the world, so much in these nations which make up the Methodist connection of Britain, so much in our churches about which we should still be weeping and lamenting. Oh, that my head were a spring of water and my eyes a fountain of tears, so that I might weep day and night, laments Jeremiah. And he's not a lone voice in the narrative of Scripture. I want to suggest that lament is perhaps the first response to injustice, to sorrow, to things which are wrong. It may well, it should in time lead on to activism. But even in its helpless rawness, lament is a very real and important response. After Gandalf's death in The Lord of the Rings, the frightened, grief-stricken Fellowship of the Ring take refuge in the woods of Lothlorien. And there the unearthly beauty of the elves' lament for Gandalf expresses something of the deep sorrow they all feel. Even though the hobbits can't understand the words, the lament is part of the necessary outpouring of their grief. Grief has to be uttered. And as church too, do we need sometimes to express our sense of grief that the world is hurting? And that over the centuries we've missed opportunities. We've not always lived up to the gospel. Sometimes, sad to say, we've been the cause of other people's suffering. Or we've stood by and allowed abuse to happen within our own communities. It's not about apportioning or even necessarily at this point assuming guilt or blame, but about giving expression to the groaning of all creation, of which Paul writes in Romans. By lament, I suppose I mean trying to understand the heart of God, beginning to try to understand what makes God's heart break as God looks at the world and at the church, feeling that heartbreak ourselves, and in response, voicing it in our lament. How are the mighty fallen, weeps David after the death of Saul. It's not an empty, formal expression of condolence on the death of a king and former friend. It's a heart-wrenching cry for all that went wrong between Saul and David, for all that might have been if things had been different, and for the death, which means things can no longer be put right on this earth. If we, like those travellers in Lothlorien, are quiet now and listen to the sounds of heaven, for what might we hear the Spirit of God lamenting? Division? I live now in Glasgow, where there is still a very real divide between Catholics and Protestants. Things are changing, but we're still on a journey. Formal unity may be years away, or it may never come. But we might all call to mind the ancient text from which Wesley preached his sermon on the Catholic spirit. If your heart is as my heart, give me your hand. Division. Disagreement. For 2 years, from 2011 to 2013, I was president of Methodist Women in Britain. During that time, I met some amazing women doing some amazing things. During that time, I'm sorry to say, I also had some very angry letters and emails from people who didn't feel there should be a women's movement in the church, and who expended quite a lot of energy in telling me so. Sometimes, to be honest, I didn't know whether to laugh or cry, as the letter I received after speaking at a particular circuit event. Dear Jill, thank you for coming to address our women's meeting, although the attendance was much lower than normal. Many of those who came were surprised to find how much they liked you and enjoyed your talk. I look forward to your correspondence. Are we not all called to different roles and different ways of service? Yes, some of us will shudder at the thought of getting ensnared by the women's group, or radicalized by radicals, or incensed by sacramentalists. Some of us would die to defend the pipe organ, and some of us would cheerfully replace them all with drum kits. Some of us would have liked bagpipes to open the conference today, but others said they would walk out. Some of us think we should have 5 Charles Wesley hymns in every service, and others think that 1 is sufficient. I believe there may be people here who don't have any at all. I would like to belong to a church where we really can live with contradictory convictions, which we've been talking about for years, or in plainer language, where we can live and let live, where we can celebrate our diversity in all its outworkings, instead of trying to find fault with one another and somehow prove that our own opinions are right. As Frederick William Faber expresses it in his classic hymn, there's a wideness in God's mercy, like the wideness of the sea. But we make his love too narrow by false strictures of our own, and we magnify his strictness with a zeal he will not own. Learning to disagree well continues to be the path ahead. Division, disagreement. My third idea doesn't really begin with a D unless it's difficult, for it is quite difficult to put into words what I want to say. As a church, we have not always behaved well towards all sorts of people. Perhaps my generation in particular needs to lament, perhaps publicly, for the people we have alienated by intransigence, intolerance, and hard-heartedness. I meet too many people who used to be Methodists, but are no longer to be found in any church. And that's often because they've been hurt. Their marriage broke down, and they felt alienated in the congregation. They came out as gay or lesbian, and the church rejected them. They brought a different culture into worship and were made to feel foolish. They got into debt and were condemned. Read Jeanette Winterson, read Philip Pullman, to see how some of the most influential voices in our culture have been wounded by the church. And within the church structures too. We haven't always treated one another with kindness and grace. I believe that causes God to lament, and I hope it causes us to lament too. Lament may not change the past, but it can change us, and we in turn can change the future. A rather strange verse in the letter of James challenges us to take very seriously the state we're in. In a chapter which begins with a rebuke about division, we find the verse, "Lament and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned into mourning, and your joy into dejection." Hard words. Words which seem to be the precise reversal of the psalmist's cry of joy that you have turned my mourning into dancing for me. This coming week, for those of us who remain here as members of conference until Thursday, we have the opportunity through our conferring to take seriously the state we are in, and at times to lament and mourn and weep for past hurts. As Lorraine and I have begun getting to know each other over the past year, I've been so impressed and encouraged by her passion for mission, and we've all been encouraged and impressed by that this afternoon. We both recognise, I think, that as a church, we do need to take seriously the state we're in, but she's teaching me not to be depressed into inactivity by that. So day by day, exploring the rhythm of mission and discipleship is our summary of where we think the church is now and how it could move forward. I hope that both laughter and lament might become part of our mission strategy in this coming year. For the people we long to reach, the people God made and Christ died for, are people whose lives are made up of laughter and lament, of highs and lows, of joys and sorrows. Let's feel that rhythm. Let's get with the beat. Living in Scotland for the past 2 years has been a wonderful privilege and blessing. Methodism may be very small north of the border, fewer than 2,000 members in mainland Scotland, vast swathes of the country with no Methodist church at all. But I think it's fair to say that Methodism in Scotland punches above its weight, and over the years has, I suspect, made a significant impact on the religious climate of the country, largely a Presbyterian Calvinist climate. And I'm grateful to Scotland for many things. A very friendly welcome to Glasgow 2 years ago. A beautiful landscape which has proved healing to us both as our journey of grief continues. And to the Methodist Church in Scotland for not only allowing me in some respects to represent them this year, but even gifting me with this wonderful Methodist tartan outfit. If you didn't know there was such a thing as a Methodist tartan, you do now. The kilt has already begun its travels of the connection by making an independent, unauthorised journey to the far north of the land when it was left on a train by a husband who shall remain nameless. But thankfully turning up at the Inverness railway station lost property office. Amongst Scotland's many gifts to the world, gifts as diverse as the television, the flush toilet, haggis and Sherlock Holmes, are the singing twin brothers, the Proclaimers, who, as we all know, have encouraged many partygoers around the British Isles and further afield to adopt a life of rhythm and pilgrimage by walking 500 miles and then another 500 miles. So we thank them for that. Another less well-known song by the Proclaimers is called Shadows Fall. There are many, far too many, in this land and more widely, upon whose lives shadows have fallen in the last few weeks. We hold them in our thoughts and prayers as we hear this contemporary lament, Shadows Fall.
Shadows fall.
Let us pray. In light and shade, in laughter and lament, in joy and in tears, you walk beside us, pilgrim God. Visit with your grace and mercy those who this night feel overwhelmed by shadow. Visit with your peace and joy those who this night feel they will never laugh again. Visit with your love and strength those who need to be raised from the dust. And may we, your people, be those who bear your grace, peace, and love to all we meet. In the name of Christ. Amen.